In this episode, we got ports and we got ports. So welcome back. In this episode, we're going to install the top end of the motor. Have a look at this triple port cylinder. Install the piston and the head. So this is the original cylinder that was on the bike. As you can see here on the top, on the bottom you have the inlet port. On the top you have the exhaust port. They're pretty tiny. And then you have the double transfer port on the sides. And this is the triple port racing cylinder. As you can see, well, the piston rings are still in there. But as you can see, the ports are very large in comparison to the original ones. And you have triple transfer ports. So hopefully that should gain us some performance. Hopefully this thing does a decent speed, but we'll have to see. Here we have the racing piston that fits with this cylinder. This is the original one. It's completely closed. On this one, you have this extra piston ports for transfer. These should fit on the extra transfer ports on the bottom there, like this. Let's take the old piston off of the rod. Install the new piston, the piston rings, install it on the motor and fit the cylinder. Let's start by taking out the piston from the rod. It's pretty straightforward. You have these two clips. Just take them with some needle nose pliers. Rotate and pull, and then you got them out. Make sure you have these pretty tight because these have a tendency to fly out and shoot themselves to the moon. Just I usually take a big screwdriver and then push the piston pen out, if it will go out. Let's just get some WD-40 in. Let's just take the other side out as well, just to have some extra room. If you have the piston out, you can just get something that's big enough to get stuck on the piston pen and just lightly tap it out. Don't do that when the piston is still connected to the crankshaft, because that will ruin your bearings because of the sideways load. If you've got the crankshaft right here, the sideways load will ruin your bearings. But if you have them like this, it's no issue. Looks like this is going to be interesting. When in doubt, get the torch out. Ow! Ow! Fuck! Guess what? It's pretty hot. So as you can see, that little push got it loose. So hopefully we can now push it out further. Yes. No need to take it out all the way. As you can see, we have the rod, which is still pretty hot, I'm guessing. Ooh, it is. Ow, fuck. So I'm going to let it cool down for a bit and then mount the new piston. So while we wait for the rod to cool down, let's check the ring gap. I've already inserted the first ring and then just push it down with the piston so it's flat. And the first ring has a gap of 0.25 millimeters, which is pretty good, I think. I think that's spot on. We have to check. I will recheck the measurements, what they should be, but I think 0.25 is actually pretty good. Just push it down. There we go. 0.25. 0.25 doesn't fit. 0.20. So we have 0.20 and 0.25. I think the 0.20 should be on top to get the biggest compression, or the least amount of blowdown. So I'm going to first install the 0.25 on the lower ring, and then the 0.20 on the top. There we go, that's one. There, these are installed, nice. So everything cooled down. I also gave it a bit of a clean, so it looks a bit nicer. So I've already installed the first piston clip, and now I'm going to push the pen in. This should fit by hand. There we go. And now give it a light tap, don't smash it, just until the pen is at the clip. You can hear the change of sound with the hammer. So now it's in place. Let's install the last clip. Ooh. Let's put this thing back on the engine and then install the cylinder. So as you can see, this washer has a couple of indents and a little tab. Here you can see there are also little indents on the crankshaft, and the tab should fit in the spline here, just like that. But first I have to actually mount the piston. The arrow is always facing the exhaust port, which in this case is at the back, so this should be the right orientation. No, no, no! Oh, for fuck's sake. Let me end the knee. It's gone. There is a new one coming with the retainer clip that I broke, so not that big of a deal. Let's just mount it like this for now, for further test fits. Let's now put on the crankcase cover so we can mount the cylinder. Have a look at the ports timing. Fuck! Stop it! So we got the crankcase back on. There is no gasket in between because it's just temporarily. It's not even torqued all the way down, but we can have a general idea of fitment this way. So let's try to fit the cylinder on. This will be a fun one. Actually, I might have a better idea. Because the way this thing is built with the removable piston rod, I think it might be easier to put the piston in the cylinder with it removed from the engine. So let's try to do that and then put everything back on the bike. Yes, just like that. Now we just have to rotate it the correct way without the rings snagging on the transfer port. That's it. Ooh, nice and tight fit. And now we can put this thing entirely back on the crankshaft. So as you can see, the new cylinder is on with the piston in. And this is what I meant with the port timing. This is the bottom dead center. And as you can see, the piston is not at the bottom of the exhaust port. I will have to check with the supplier if this is how it should be. Also, the transfer ports only have a small opening. I think the cylinder needs to be lifted a bit. You could maybe add a couple of millimeters by adding double gaskets at the bottom. Right now there is no gasket, so that might also make a bit of a difference. But I will check with the supplier and I will get back to you.
72 hours later.
We're back. It's been a couple days. I did some research. My new batch of parts just came in. So for the port timing, etc., it's actually normal that the transfers and the exhaust ports are not open all the way. That helps for the low-end torque, which is something that is used in this bike because this is not a RPM monster. This stays at a relatively low RPM. So that helps for torque in the low and mid range. In theory, raising the cylinder with, for example, a spacer or an extra gasket, the extra gasket might help a bit, but raising it with a spacer, that would in fact allow the exhaust port and the transfer board to be opened more, and that should help peak power in the high RPMs. But that's not really ideal for this setup, because then I would have to shave the cylinder, because raising it will lower compression, and also I'm not looking for high RPM with this bike. I'm just looking for a decent mid-range speed and some low-end power. So I'm going to keep it as is, with just one base gasket. If need be, we can add an extra base gasket and maybe do some testing with that. So here we have a new bushing and some needle bearings for the new connecting rod. This is the new bushing. This should fit, but the needle bearing doesn't fit the old bushing up here. So I will have to get that one off before I can install the new parts. Yes, we got it off. Oh, not too hot, please. We got the needle bearing. Let's see if it still fits. I've cleaned everything out. Oh no. So it did deform it a bit. I'll have to file it down a little bit. There's a little edge here. It's really minor, but I think it's enough. It's on. So I just filed down this little lip on the side of the bushing. It doesn't really matter because the bearing doesn't ride on it anyway. Worst case scenario, the bearing gets flush with the washer that'll be here, but the needles that are the actual bearing still are not on the little filed down piece here. So perfect. Let's put the piston on the new rod and then put it in the cylinder and then put everything back onto here, just like we did before. So we got the stack assembled, pretty straightforward, same as before. So now all you have left to do is heat up the big end from the piston rod and put it on its bearing. Go. That's on. So now just the retainer and the nut for the piston rod, and then we can finally close this crankcase. There. Don't forget to actually bend the tab. There. So I'm going to clean everything out just a final time with some compressed air and some brake cleaner, and then use liberal amounts of oil for its first startup. Just a little tip, get this one in the back first, because of the bigger ports. There is some cylinder in the way to get the nut on, so you actually have to raise the cylinder again to get it on. The cylinder back on. It already sounds pretty nice. I'm going to put the head on and measure the squish. So to measure the squish, you take some solder and you put it in the spark plug, rotate the piston all the way up, and then the head and the piston flattens the solder. I'm not sure if you'll be able to catch this on camera, but this is now flat. And now we measure this, and we have 0.85 millimeters or 0.9, which is actually pretty spot on. They advise you to have between 0.8 and 1.1 millimeter squish, so right in the ballpark. Should be good. The engine is complete. It sounds really chunky, like that. So that will be it for this part. If you thought this was helpful, consider liking and subscribing for more. There will be more episodes on this bike. The next episode we will address the fueling, and then we hopefully should get this thing running. We'll see. Stay tuned for more. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.